Did the Liberal government just admit to what we've been saying all along about their gun confiscation? That our hunting and sporting firearms are actually not battlefield weapons. Let's have a look. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about the Liberal government's new gun ban in Canada. Most of you have probably heard by now, but in case you haven't, on December 5th, the Liberals expanded their gun ban list, unlawfully banning another 324 of our hunting and sporting firearms. A few notable mentions here. They banned all of the AR-180s, the Tavor X95, the Bren, on top of a whole slew of PCCs and 22LRs. And I'm not going to go over the list in detail since so many other people have done that already, but it amounts to another round of banning black scary guns because they're supposedly designed for the battlefield. And that's the bit I actually want to talk about today. Designed for the battlefield. During the announcement of this extended gun ban list, both Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc as well as a previous Safety Minister, Bill Blair, who is now the Minister of National Defense, indicated for the first time that our confiscated firearms could be sent to the battlefields of Ukraine to help with the war effort against Russia. So once again, we see their gun control rhetoric mimicking the American gun conversation. This is a video from just a couple months after the Ukraine war popped off in late February 2022, where our super sleuth undercover detective, Brandon Herrera, went to an American anti-gun rally where this was a prime talking point.
What was suggested was potentially confiscating assault weapons from American citizens and sending them to Ukraine where they actually need them. Would you support something like that?
I think that would be useful. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So even though the Liberals are several years late to the game, they're finally getting on board with this rhetoric. And what is most revealing to me, though, is exactly what they said on the matter. I thought their specific use of certain words was rather curious and very telling.
The government of Canada has committed to the Ukrainian government to identify whether some of these guns could be donated to support the fight for democracy in Ukraine.
As my colleague Minister LeBlanc has indicated, we've been working very closely with our friends in Ukraine to ensure that weapons that were intended to be used in combat could be made available to them. And just this past October, we reached out to the Ukrainians once again to see whether any of the weapons that are currently under amnesty through Canada's assault-style firearms compensation program could be of any use to them in their fight against Russia. And they confirmed that indeed, some of the weapons that are part of the program would be suitable.
Both LeBlanc and Blair said the same thing. Some of these banned firearms could be used for the battlefield. So what I want to know is, what do they mean by some? After all, in case anyone needs any reminding, the Liberals have been adamant for years now that all of these so-called assault-style firearms are designed solely for military use on the battlefield.
Today, we are closing the market for military-grade assault weapons in Canada. These weapons were designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time. There is no use and no place for such weapons in Canada.
This was a gun that was designed for a battlefield. It was designed to ensure that the greatest amount of lethal force could be exercised in the shortest period of time.
These 324 models of prohibited firearms will be added to the 1,500 models added in 2020 and have technical characteristics that are similar. And they are made for battlefields, not for hunting.
And of course, we have long been contesting these claims for as long as Liberals have been lying about our firearms, and now it seems they have lost the plot. For at least half a decade now, they've been boldly claiming that we're the ones that are lying, that our firearms are not hunting and sporting firearms, and that we're in the pockets of the NRA on top of whatever other nonsense they've also said. And now they've gone and told everyone that actually, in fact, we've been right from the very start. Blair very specifically said, "We reached out to see whether any of the weapons could be of any use to them in their fight against Russia." And Ukraine responded with, some of the weapons would be suitable. So they've been saying for all this time that our firearms are battlefield armaments and that they have no use and no place in Canada. Yet now we see them exploring the idea, if maybe, perhaps, it's possible that some of these firearms could potentially be used on a battlefield. Both LeBlanc and Blair are clearly reading from scripts for these comments, which means this is a premeditated and deliberate statement. If the truth mattered at all on this topic, such an admission would be enough to have these regulations completely dismantled. But as we know, gun control has never been about public safety for the Liberals, and truth has never been a part of their conversation. Despite all of that, this promise to send our firearms to Ukraine is actually a bit of a double-edged sword for the Liberals. Blair says that Ukraine wants some of these firearms, but that also means that there are a lot of firearms on the list, even most of the firearms on the list, which are directly inappropriate for battlefield use. Now, for what it's worth, we've been lied to far too many times for me to just take Blair's word for it, so I would challenge the Liberals. Offer the list to Ukraine publicly and get a public response. If it's true that these firearms are designed solely for the battlefield, then it's reasonable to think that Ukraine should want all of them for battlefield purposes, right? If there's any firearm that Ukraine says they don't want, then it is demonstrably not a battlefield weapon. Not only would this mean that those firearms should not be banned, but it also proves that the Liberals were lying from the start. And there should be two rules for this test. First off, any of the firearms sent to Ukraine must be sent to the front lines and not for use in training or support roles. After all, the claim is that they're designed for the battlefield, so they should see battlefield use. If they're inappropriate for battlefield use, then they're demonstrably not battlefield firearms. And secondly, they should also not be modified. For example, most of our semi-automatic 5.56 Stanag spec rifles could be retrofitted to be compatible with select fire triggers. However, adding these parts to the firearm would require modification to the frame or receivers of those firearms. So if the claim is that our firearms are designed for the battlefield, then it stands to reason that their design should not need to be altered in order to be suitable for the battlefield, right? Now, realistically, of course this is never going to happen. The Liberals would never want to put their list under such an inspection. And their bans are based on a delicately balanced ecosystem of lies which would immediately fall into ruin at even the slightest scrutiny. But I will say this, if such a thing ever did happen, and Ukraine for some reason did want my semi-automatic WK-180 for a soldier to use in Ukraine, and if Canada was going to give me a fair price for it, I would willingly send it. No ifs, ands, or buts. If my sporting firearm can save Ukrainian lives, then I am down. Besides, Trudeau's going to be out of a job in a few months here, and I'll be able to go buy another one once he's gone. But realistically, even if Ukraine truly does want semi-automatic sporting firearms for use on their battlefields, that's an indication that they're probably about to lose the war. It would mean that they have nothing better to use, not necessarily that these firearms are ideal, or even good, for such purposes. But Stanag pattern 5.56 rifles aside, there are tons of other firearms on the list which genuinely can't even be modified to become useful on the battlefield. Most notably are the plethora of 22s and PCCs on the lists. Trudeau and the Liberals have long said that these are not necessary for hunting or sporting, and therefore they can be banned, but necessity is not the test. And as it turns out, he even lied about that too. Go figure. Melody is a 2-time national IPSC and PCC champion, and a 4 times multi-provincial champion. And she was on her way to the PCC World Competitions in just a few months here in Prague. And now, she has not even a single firearm to use for that competition. So absolutely these firearms were necessary for her sport, even though necessity is not the test, and now she can no longer participate in her globally recognized sport. And it's also not a weapon of war or designed for the battlefield. No military anywhere fields PCCs for infantry use on battlefields. It just doesn't happen. They're completely inadequate and absolutely outmatched as compared to any rifle. This is especially true for rifles chambered in .22 long rifle, of which there are now several hundred on the combined ban lists. And the government has just banned the GSG-16, which is a rifle chambered in .22 LR. But I just showed you in a very recent video actually, just how severe the power mismatch is between .22 LR and real rifles, and I used the GSG-16 in that video to prove it. So no soldier in Ukraine would ever be issued a PCC or .22 LR under any circumstances for battlefield use. And lastly, the Liberals in their announcement admitted that their list is still incomplete, and that they're going to be creating a panel of experts to help the RCMP complete the list by February. This is probably going to be the long-promised return of CFAC or some other bureaucratic equivalent. And the Liberals have also promised to finally make good on their magazine ban by no later than March. So you put all these pieces together, and it sounds like the Liberals are gearing up for a springtime election, and they want these as their primary talking points. High-capacity magazines and assault weapons. Even though these things are just categorically untrue, the truth just has never mattered to them. With all of that in mind, though, the CCFR is currently at the Federal Court of Appeals today to have this illegal use of the OIC powers overturned. Specifically, they're actually discussing the 2020 OIC, but the same flaws are present in the current regulations, and I expect any ruling that they make on the 2020 list to also carry forward to any current or future lists. After all, it's the unlawful use of the powers at issue, not necessarily just the contents of the list. So, we'll see. All of these threats against our community from the Liberal government may simply be empty if the Federal Court of Appeals has some sense on their shoulders and doesn't opt to rob us like Justice Kane did. The law is actually on our side for once for this one, but whether or not the Federal Court of Appeals places any value in the truth is anyone's guess. All that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.